How you doing, everybody? We're back to another movie review, and I gotta say I've been really looking forward to doing this one in particular, because I think, as you can tell for those who follow my channel, or at least have seen it, I am a Thomas nut, as you can plainly see by my shirt, and I feel like this one's truly important to me because it has been a part of my childhood. And the thing is that for every childhood show or memory that we all have, there's always, some ugly duckling that we end up dealing with from time to time. And this one in particular tends to take the cake on a lot of things. And I think it's important that we discuss that because I'm going to come right out and just say, I think this was a job well done. And even though this was not the version that was intended to be released, I think there's a lot of good stuff to it. And I think it's time we take a deeper look at these parts, and that way we understand why I feel that way. But again, I respect people's opinions, so I understand some people are not satisfied with it for various reasons. And I will cover those topics. So today's review is Thomas and the Magic Railroad.
Looking back, locomotives. Engines that have powered through the industrial age and have transformed how things are moved across landscapes. Metal titans of masterful engineering and design, constructed to transport massive amounts of freight and other goods to and fro from one destination to the next. This is the first thing I think of when it comes to these enormous behemoths. They are just so awesome to witness. However, I would think most people who have the same admiration for these heavy-duty giants can give part of this credit thanks to the fame of Thomas the Tank Engine. Like many success stories, most creations come from humble beginnings with no intentions in becoming a mass media sensation. Heck, Thomas the Tank Engine himself wasn't even the first real main character. But it was all because of a loving father who wanted to entertain his son while he was sick, which ended up becoming a set of children's books, and then finally being picked up by a wonderful lady by the name of Britt Allcroft. There the brand would peak with the praiseworthy release of the live-action adaptation of the stories.
And that's just the condensed version. I mean, it's been covered over and over again. It's like beating a dead horse, basically. There's no point in me covering it in detail. But, if you're a Thomas fan, you should all kind of already know this. And if you're not a Thomas fan, why are you watching this again? Because most people don't enjoy it if they don't like the show. But I mean, feel free if you want to continue anyway.
Since then, the Thomas & Friends brand has continued to thrive and inspire people of all ages. I am truly amazed with what people have taken from the stories and how they have applied it in their own creative way. From people making their own content using Thomas merchandise, making their own Thomas merchandise by customizing what they already have, to remaking various iconic scenes, to giving in-depth reviews for other Thomas mediums, to lending their voices for well-known characters in various improv sessions, or even just recreating the iconic music from the show. Who would have thought this would even be done? These are all people who have been influenced by the brand one way or another. Mind you, that's just the YouTube channels. The creativity spans farther than that, with people making accurate sets using larger scale models. A whole site dedicated to the history of the franchise covering a wide range of topics. And not to mention the Thomas Wikia. And of course, there's all the parodies made on the show, too.
Thomas the Tank Engine was huffing and puffing when suddenly...
Bust my buffers! This isn't the way to the Whistling Woods.
No, it ain't, pal. Unless the mayor of Sodor gives me $100 million, we're gonna drive this dynamite right into Knapford Station.
Why can't I stop? This is Harold the helicopter. How can I help you?
I need you to shoot at Thomas and derail him from the track.
Why, I couldn't. Thomas is my friend.
Ugh, this is why I never work with talking machines. Well, it's like they say, never send a smiley helicopter to do an action star's work.
Nobody says that.
Ernest the engine car had finally cracked.
Get out of the f***ing way!
He said to no one in particular.
Once again, the day was saved by Optimus Prime.
Hi, buddy.
And Vector, too.
You're worse than Uncle Thomas the Tank Engine.
I reckon I'll take you where these here tracks go, sir.
Thank you, Uncle Thomas. You're a clean, articulate train.
Yeah, I don't even know what this is. But you see how creative people can be. With that said, Thomas the Tank Engine is a trademark that will forever leave an impression on the railway community, no doubt.
It truly blows my mind. I can't even get over how much Thomas stuff I have, aside from this shirt. Thomas models. Thomas VHS tapes. Thomas Ertl merchandise, stuff that's still in the package, Shining Time Station related too, anniversaries, containers, more things. I mean, it's all over the place. And even... Shoot, look at this. Theodore Tugboat merchandise. I mean, this is obviously not the movie of topic, but, you know. Thomas Wooden Railway items. You know, you got your horrid lorries and Lady and old aquarium cars. Freddy over here. You know, all that good stuff. And you get books, the original ones that the TV show is based on. And then you have books that are actually based on the TV show, which is kind of funny because it's kind of came full circle with books that the TV show is based on, and then you have, you know, books that are based on the TV show. Then, of course, you have your audio read-along books and their respective audio tapes. And then you have even crazier. Yep. Somehow I still have this. Thomas and Friends sleeping bag. Yep. Even that kind of merchandise. I think I made my point. And I'm not even the biggest Thomas fan out there, at least I think. Which only says that if I feel that way, I can only imagine how others feel and how much stuff they have.
Sadly, even with all these things being made at the time, the trademark did suffer a blow when the first and only theatrically released film related to it was distributed. That's right, Thomas and the Magic Railroad. It was a big step for the logo, and I would call it Britt Allcroft's magnum opus of sorts. She was an endearing woman who not only put the show on people's TV screens, but she also helped create the popular Shining Time Station TV show. This was the show that helped introduce kids in North America to Thomas and Friends, using the power of storytelling and adventures of kids in a fictional railway station, with the help of miniature man called Mr. Conductor, played famously by Beatles drummer Ringo Starr, and then the great George Carlin. The problem was, producers were not sure Thomas and Friends would catch on by itself, which was why the show was created. Unfortunately, that show has a tragedy of its own, being that there has never been an official re-release of the show being digitally remastered and such.
I remember only bits of the show, but the definitive way I was introduced to Thomas and Friends was through the read-along Random House audio cassette tapes. Ah, Random House, how I miss thee.
The idea for Thomas and the Magic Railroad, however, was to merge the concept of Shining Time Station and Thomas the Tank Engine. And since stories of Thomas were already being inserted into the Shining Time series, what better way to make things as inclusive as possible by involving both parties in the movie? You see, nowadays everyone and their great uncle is trying to copy Marvel's cinematic universe formula. Well, look at Britt. She may have only been using 2 different universes, but she was doing it before it was even a thing. Yeah, now what, Marvel? Regrettably, the movie did not prove to be a success like the original source material that it spawned from was. Even with just a measly budget of $19 million, which is nothing these days, it struggled to even make that back, of which there were several reasons attributed to its failure.
Keep in mind I'm no expert on the matter and I may miss some details. But I did do my research, and I will try to point out as many key players as possible in this explanation. But if you do want more information, feel free to visit the Sodor Island fan site, because they have way more information than I will ever give.
Before we actually cover these problems, though, it must be understood that the movie itself went through a few overhauls. Prior to its July 2000 release date, the script had already been through some changes. There's an available PDF of the scripts from May 1999 and August 1999, both of which are largely different by comparison to the finished product. By early 2000, filming had wrapped and things were going well. That is until March of 2000, when the film premiered to a test audience and they felt one of the critical components to the story was too scary. That part belonged to actor Doug Lennox, who played a character called P.T. Boomer. Originally, that was supposed to be the main antagonist to the film. But supposedly, Lennox was just too much. And with that, Britt Allcroft and company were forced to literally cut Lennox and his role from the film and make an entirely different movie. The runtime went from supposedly 110 minutes to just 85 minutes. I think it's safe to assume some of the plot was left in those areas cut out, right?
This is just one of the major edits applied to the original cut of the film, and there's more to come. And you'll see just how different the original film could have been if it was left alone.
But before we move on, there was speculation as to whether this character actually existed. And as time progressed, more and more things were revealed, like the scripts mentioned prior, and small snippets of the character in various trailers.
To get my revenge, you and that engine.
That is until one day someone had acquired and posted on YouTube the original chase scene from the movie.
I'll get you, Bernard Stone! Yes!
No, you won't, Boomer. Because the magic you refuse to believe in will get the better of you.
As opposed to what was shown in theaters.
Now I'll get you, Bernard Stone!
No, you won't. Because the magic you refuse to believe in will get the better of you.
That alone was a big indication that the movie people had seen originally was indeed not the original at all. And yet P.T. Boomer did make it into the movie. Kind of. Just as a background character in one scene, and as a figurine in another part of the chase. But that's not all when it came to what was removed. There were also scenes of the protagonist's grandparents, interactions between Boomer and other characters, and even how the story was told entirely. It was actually supposed to play out more like Edward Scissorhands, involving an older character telling the tale as a storybook, which was somehow also released.
It actually amazes me how much has come out since the distribution of the theatrical cut of the film, because that tells me that there are people who want to see more of what Miss Allcroft originally had in mind.
Another reason one might say why the film performed badly was because it appealed to less fans than expected. In various reviews and discussions, there were tons of complaints that the human scenes were boring or disengaging, and people were there just to see the trains. Some fans got even more fired up when they learned certain English and Australian voice actors were replaced with either Canadian or gender-swapped actors entirely. For example, Thomas's first original voice was going to be John Bellis, a part-time taxi driver.
Well, who else were you expecting? Don't worry, I'm on my way. I'll save a seat for you.
Australian actor Keith Scott was originally cast as the voice of Diesel 10.
Aha! The blue puffball! And just look who else I've found! Splodge, get up here and destroy!
Losing your sparkle, eh? What perfect timing!
Lastly, both Percy and James were intended to be voiced by UK narrator Michael Angelis.
Off, Percy. As long as I've got rails to run on, I can go anywhere in any weather anyhow. Goodbye. You know, little Toby, he boasted, I'm an important engine. Everyone knows it. I'm as regular as clockwork, never late, always on time.
And yet Angelis and Bellis were dropped due to their voices sounding too old for the characters, while Scott suffered the same fate as Lennox for sounding too scary. Of course, when looking at it now, it's possible people would think otherwise. And then there were other people who were exposed to completely different dubs in a teaser trailer involving Eric Idle, doing the trailer voice, Thomas, and Diesel 10s. And it just sounds weird.
And Thomas.
Little engines can do big things.
Things are gonna change around here, Puffball.
And this particular trailer was only found in the Spills and Chills and Other Thomas Thrills VHS tape. And I only discovered this a couple years after the film was released, which means I'm one of you late bloomers. And that means I'm behind the 8 ball, but, you know, we're not always on top of things.
One other thing critics bashed the film for were the effects.
The mouths don't move! You got enough facial expressions in your library, but you can't come up with one motor to go inside the character's lips to make it move up and down?
You might have noticed there that although the train's eyes roll around in its head, the lips don't move.
It's time to recall that prior to this movie, 5 seasons of the show had already been completed and released to the public, which is also why I have not made a review on this movie until now. Notice this review has been posted after I completed Season 5 in my commentary videos. Anyway, none of the stories in those 5 seasons have moving mouths either. Again, if someone was watching this show up to 5 seasons and didn't enjoy it, then why oh why did they even bother viewing this film? The argument has been thrown around that the TV series had a smaller budget, which I could agree with. However, the fact that the film crew kept this intact, although they gave the characters individual voices, was the right decision. Psh, trains with faces with no moving mouths being creepy. Come on. Let's not be the individual from the New Yorker who read way too much into this, shall we? Everyone is entitled to their own opinion, and I am not going to argue with them, but I will say that theirs specifically is heavily misguided.
Nope, sorry, denied.
There are things far worse than static mouth movement. Yeah, and we all know how wonderfully scarring that trip was. Although, I did enjoy that little romp, too. I could see it now. They'll either find out what true creepiness is, or they'll actually find it more fitting to their own opinions. Anyway, going back to the whole mouths bit, that seemed to be some of the critics' biggest gripes. Just look at Rotten Tomatoes' consensus. Kids these days demand cutting-edge special effects or at least a clever plot with cute characters. And this movie has neither. No. Sometimes you don't need the latest and greatest because this film managed just fine with 300 special effects that were used, thank you very much.
Besides, what makes this feature film that much more special to me is that it is the only film to feature Thomas in a live-action setting. Okay, except from a more recent action movie blockbuster.
Being that we are on the topic of movies about Thomas, the failure of this movie didn't keep the brand down for long. Almost a decade later, reports in 2009 began to surface about another theatrical film in the works, of which in 2011 it was confirmed that Shane Acker, the director of the animated film 9, was attached to helm the movie. This supposed film in question is probably shrouded in even more mystery than the lost footage involving Thomas and the Magic Railroad. The reason for this being a couple things. Shane Acker's 9 film was not a child-friendly film. It was rated PG-13 that involved, quote, a post-apocalyptic world where soul-sucking machines dominated the landscape. Yeah. On top of that, the writers attached to this new Thomas movie were more of a mixed bag, with Alvin and the Chipmunks writer Will McRobb and Shrek the Third writer Josh Klausner. But the real attention grabber was the plot synopsis given by Acker. He said, "The tale will revolve around a preteen boy who has drifted apart from his father. The son is introduced into the world of Sodor, a place his father visited as a child but can't remember. There is a bonding experience." Okay, kind of vague. On top of that, it was indicated that the setting would take place during World War II, not to mention the teaser poster for it.
This was a big deal at the time because the show itself was going through a number of changes. But after 2011, it ended up becoming a nothing burger, because otherwise it would have had more to say on it. And it would have been interesting to know what Acker was planning on doing with this particular plot. Plus, I would have had a separate review on it.
Sadly, what the flop that was supposed to be Thomas's biggest adventure ended up being the most reviled thing about the Blue Engine among many fans. To this day, it is still hated by many because of how different it was to that of the TV show. Some people thought the original creator, the Reverend W. Awdry, would be spinning in his grave, which is possible if he was living, and it would be inappropriate to blame Britt Allcroft for the film's reception. She knew what she had in mind to begin with, until it was rearranged and altered into something she did not want at all. Besides, she was one of the main proprietors behind getting the books adapted for television. Without her interest, Thomas and Friends would not exist. Her whole idea was to entertain children and educate them. To discredit her and say that this film was her trying to destroy the name is preposterous. Her imagination and innovation is up there with people like Mr. Rogers and such. Plus, it would make no sense if that was her motive. Britt Allcroft was a blessing to all of us Thomas fans. And although some of the things that don't make sense that remained in the theatrical cut were a part of the original script, the storytelling makes sense. And since it was meddled with in the final stages of production, not all the blame should be placed on Britt Allcroft's shoulders. Thus, we must move forward with our review.
We gotta keep this train rolling. We don't wanna break down on this highway.
I mean, would you rather have Allcroft directing, the woman who's behind the show, or would you rather have somebody else directing? Yeah, I'm pretty sure we should have Allcroft doing it.
Overall plot and writing. So what exactly is the whole Magic Railroad thing about? Well, to those who are not fond of it, they felt the storyline was clumsy, needlessly complicated, and too heavy-handed in the human drama. But that is far from the case. The story involves two different subplots converging into one another due to a shared connection. At Shining Time Station, Mr. Conductor, played by Alec Baldwin, is the magic railwayman who enjoys living the dual life between the real world and the island of Sodor where Thomas and his friends live. But one day, Mr. C begins to notice that his travels between these two worlds have started to deteriorate. Gold dust is what powers Mr. C's transportation, and he soon learns it is the cause of his problem. Without it, he will be forever stuck in one realm. Little does he know that a teenage girl named Lily, played by Mara Wilson, will end up holding the key to re-energizing his power source. The key is Lily's grandpa, played by Peter Fonda, and a secret engine called Lady that he hides away in a mountain, struggling to make her work again. He also has reservations about bringing her out, too. The reason for his hesitation is that he runs the risk of coming across an evil engine, known as Diesel 10, who ruined her once before and would gladly do it again.
I don't know why, it just seems that people who don't enjoy this movie find the plot needlessly complicated. When in fact it really isn't. I don't know why, but when I watched it as a kid, I understood it the first time around.
Also, remember that this is the chopped-up, re-edited theatrical version that was released to the public. Honestly, I think Allcroft's original vision had more layers in its story and topics of discussion. The whole P.T. Boomer versus Burnett Stone subplot was more about how love conquers all, and how it can be magical. That and the relationship Boomer had with Stone and the mystery engine, Lady, was also in conjunction with how Stone loved his wife, and how Boomer was jealous of Stone's happiness. Diesel 10, on the other hand, was just an engine trying to get rid of Thomas and his friends, when in reality it was Boomer who was going to be the villain with character depth, and Diesel 10 was just a mustache twirler villain. In other words, he was just there to cause havoc, but was in no way the big baddie. There was even a supposed scene where Lily grows up and has a family with a boy named Patch, played by Cody McMains, that she ended up meeting in this story. Said film scene is allegedly still in the theatrical cut at the end. But of course, this is what could have been. That is why I'm mentioning these plot points even though my reviews are spoiler-free. Because this is not what happens in the movie we got. Because after that wonderful test audience screening, we ended up with what is arguably the watered-down version of what Allcroft wanted. Instead of having Boomer as the interesting villain with a relatable backstory, Diesel 10 was pushed to the forefront with the simple intention of taking over Sodor by quasi-adopting Boomer's motive of destroying Stone's mystery engine and the magic.
Quite frankly, it still makes sense to me. It's not like I'm trying to understand a Neil Breen film. Britt Allcroft is on a whole nother level, and her team managed to put together a good, wholesome film.
Look at it this way, too. How many times have we had something close to us that was taken away by someone or something else? This movie itself is a reflection to that of Britt Allcroft's experience of executing this whole production, only to have it taken away from her. The SIF site actually goes in more detail about this, but essentially that's what it is. Allcroft is Burnett Stone, who had a passion project, Lady, or, in this case, the movie. They both loved these things very much, but due to unfortunate circumstances, an entity took what these people loved most and made it impossible for them to get it back the way they wanted. Thus, they ended up stuck with whatever was once theirs, only to see it as a constant reminder that they could not fulfill their vision. The parallel between the movie plot and the actual events is uncanny, and rather tragic being that this happened. Now, as to whether Allcroft's cut could have garnered a more welcoming reception, no one knows for sure. But it should interest the viewer in what might have been if things were left untampered. And it's not like Britt Allcroft was a newbie to filmmaking at all. She was continuously working with the rest of the TV crew and making sure things were moving well. Not to mention she was also the writer and creator of the Magic Adventures of Mumphy TV series, and a movie based on the same character. She also received the Gemini and the Television Pioneer Awards, along with being nominated for a BAFTA. Come on, that's gotta mean something.
Now, as much as I'm putting the movie up there, I still acknowledge people's negative points on this movie. Except the New Yorker on the show bit. But either way, I myself still have things about the movie I'm not truly fond of, and it really does bug me.
One of the first things fans will notice is that among the engines to appear in this movie, all are seen except Edward the number 2 engine. This is what doesn't make sense to me at all. Edward was always an underrated character. He was the underdog engine who would always be pitted against the odds and somehow pull through even when others didn't believe in him. Historically, he was also the first engine to be told in the Reverend stories. On top of that, he was part of the main 7 to be introduced in the first season of the TV show, and he was the one who set Thomas's whole career in motion. I don't know, after making all those points, I think that's enough creds to at least warrant a cameo. At least. But no. According to producer Phil Furl, quote, there just wasn't enough screen time and opportunity to utilize Edward in a way that added value to the whole, end quote. Even visual effects producer Dave Axford said that he didn't hear anything about Edward being used, although all the models were shipped to the set. That just grinds my gears. Like I said, at least a cameo. I completely understand that after 5 seasons, the movie won't have a chance to include all the characters, but Edward should have definitely been there.
Yet, even with this issue, there were other liberties taken with the Thomas brand that people were not happy about. And this is partially why most fans who don't like it don't consider this movie to be in the Thomas canon, so to speak.
Here are some alleged faults. There are a bunch of nonsensical things that do not fit into the realm that the TV show had established. For one thing, early on, the show had depicted many events to occur with realistic physics and require the laws of nature to act like they do in the real world. Aside from talking trains. There were telephones people called from, operators manned the engine controls or point switches, and animals were, well, animals. However, that's not what's depicted here. Mr. C can somehow make phone calls on a plant known as the bellflower, and there was no explanation to that at all. He just quotes it, and fans are supposed to know what he means.
I have to find a bellflower. I need to make a call.
What? How? Why? Why can't he just use a telephone like he did in the other scene? Even if they had the obsolete payphone standing nearby, I'd buy that quicker than a bell phone flower. Then there's this whole scene where Mr. C is trying to solve a clue and he receives help from some random rabbit off screen after being left a handwritten note.
What's this? I notice you left your thinking cap behind. Try these instead. They're good for the brain. Gone fishing rabbit.
Again, what? How? And why? No animal has ever been depicted in that way before, in the show. So the reason behind this is? I'm not going to even bother trying to understand the talking tumbleweeds.
Follow me, partner.
Right this way to Bufferville. Just a walk in the park.
Lastly, there's a lack of human characters on the island of Sodor. One of the things I fought to clarify in my episode commentaries of the show was proving that the engines could not run themselves and that operators were needed to make them work. Here, this movie completely blows that out of the way by having the engines start, stop, shake, and sneeze all on their own. Okay, well, if that was the case, why did they even have a cab crew to begin with when this show started? Also, let's not forget that no other passenger humans are found anywhere either.
These things just don't add up to me. Why go through and bother changing all the things that were set in place from the show? But that's not all.
As he rests at the iconic Tidmouth sheds that the engines had been featured in for so long, Mr. C has this out-of-nowhere conversation with a bat and bouncy ball. At first, it seems innocent enough, but looking at it again, it's just oddly placed and contributes nothing to anything.
So who dropped the ball then? Oh, there you are. I'd like to have a nice cup of hot cocoa. Would you fellas care to join me? No? What would you rather do instead? Go outside and play? Well, I can understand that. What do you think? Why do you keep hitting him like that? You're gonna have a timeout.
It was almost like the camera was rolling and just happened to film Baldwin playing around on off takes because he was bored. But that isn't the only place in the movie. He also talks to goldfish, a dog named Mutt, wall paintings, and materializes ice cream from plant fertilizer. Yeah, not even Ringo Starr or George Carlin's version of Mr. Conductor did that. Why does Baldwin's version have to be so out in left field? Not to mention the other bizarre or contrived moments, like when Mr. C has to locate a windmill but can't find it. You mean to tell me he knows exactly what windmill to go to? Which just so happens to be the right one he was looking for? Or the fact that almost every location hangs an Uncle Sam-esque poster of Sir Topham Hatt saying he needs whoever's reading the bold text? Even more ridiculous is that Mr. C uses his gold dust teleportation power to get on board Thomas. Seriously? You couldn't just climb on board? He does have little side ladders. How lazy are we gonna be, Mr. C? Especially when people can get in the same train cab. Talk about being wasteful.
And as much as these parts bug people, and me sometimes, it's important to remember that that should not be the main focus for this movie. Because there is a lot of heart and soul behind this movie, and there's a lot of passionate people behind it. As well as the people who passionately don't like it. But that doesn't mean it shouldn't be enjoyed.
Actors and characters. When it comes to the acting, this film also gets heavy criticism on its main stars. More specifically, the three types of acting have been pointed out. Overacting, attributed to Alec Baldwin's overly energetic performance. Underacting, being Peter Fonda looking miserable playing the role he was given. And unsure of what to do acting, that being Mara Wilson because of not understanding how to react to certain surroundings. However, there are those who do not believe this. Yes, all three thespians display emotions that hit all ends of the spectrum in a very extreme manner, but that's because that's how their role was written. To elaborate, the performances portrayed by these actors is acceptable. Alec Baldwin as Mr. Conductor has the energy to carry his role. Being that Mr. C is a unique character and has been portrayed by other iconic people like George Carlin and Ringo Starr from the TV show, Baldwin does make his performance his own, albeit much more energetic than the last two.
Watch out for Diesel, definitely. Keep an eye on Henry's health, certainly. Yes, sir, the 3 R's, reading, writing, and arithmetic. I mean, I will be responsible, reliable, and really useful. Toolkit, check. Ticket puncher? Check, check. Aye. All aboard! Just testing, Billy. Mustn't let my conducting skills get rusty.
Important day, Mr. C?
It is a very important day.
For Baldwin, I've already done one review on him before in The Shadow, but he was also in other notable good and bad movies like Beetlejuice, Cats and Dogs, the SpongeBob SquarePants movie, and The Cat in the Hat. Yeah, let's make sure we don't watch that last one.
No!
Really though, casting Alec as the next Mr. C wasn't a bad idea. I mean, how more coincidental can you get, being that Baldwin is also a well-known locomotive brand? Peter Fonda as Burnett Stone is quite honestly the heart and soul of the story. Being that this mystery engine lady meant so much to him, it's critical that the viewer sees this as the reason why he's in this depression-like state of mind. Some people have a hard time getting over their failures, and that's exactly what Stone is dealing with.
But I didn't guard you well. I just don't seem to understand about magic anymore. But I've never been able to make up for the mistake I made. And I've never been able to bring her to life, to make her steam.
Fonda is another major hitter among movies with credits to his name like Easy Rider, Future World, The Cannonball Run, Ulee's Gold, and Ghost Rider. For Mara Wilson, her performance is fine too. She being Burnett Stone's granddaughter is believable, and she's constantly making her role as Lily relatable because not all children understand adults that well either. And seeing that she knows her grandfather has been emotionally distraught, it makes her attempt to connect with him that more significant.
Grandpa's been so sad since Grandma Tasha died, and he never comes here to see us.
Well, maybe your visit will cheer him up, Did you get his present?
Here. I'm making him a friendship bracelet.
Honey, that's beautiful.
Here, Grandpa. This is a friendship bracelet. Grandma taught me how to make one when I was little. This one's for you.
Thank you, Lily.
Mara Wilson is best known from her childhood acting days with starring in movies like Mrs. Doubtfire, Matilda, and A Miracle on 34th Street. After this movie, however, she took a decade-long hiatus from the acting life before she started coming back for small appearances. She did, however, return for a few episodes in the BoJack Horseman show.
However, these are not the only three actors to talk about. Everyone loves bringing them up in their conversations, but no one seems to talk about the supporting characters to the cast, even though much of their parts were cut from the original film.
Russell Means as Billy Two Feathers does a good job. Means' performance has a very soft and understanding demeanor that makes it difficult not to see him any other way. Plus, he drives a Mastodon Class 480 steam locomotive. That's some hefty stuff right there. Aside from this, he does add a tad bit of mythos to the story.
Oh, I've been looking at your map. What are these mysterious shadowy lines doing on it? They look like straight railroad tracks, but I can't see any tracks around here except for the ones that you travel on.
It's mysteries that make this land so...
magical?
I found this child's drawing in an old locker in the Lost and Found. Look at the signature, Billy. Burnett Stone. It's hard to believe Burnett could have ever looked that happy.
Oh, Burnett had a wonderful smile.
Means was in other films like The Last of the Mohicans, Natural Born Killers, Pocahontas, and Pathfinder. Playing alongside Means is Didi Khan, the bubbly and happy-go-lucky Stacy Jones, who literally is the embodiment of Khan. There's almost no difference between the two. Manager Jones is always pleasant-sounding and friendly to everyone she meets, as well as bringing up the whole notion that Burnett Stone used to travel to Sodor. She also shares a nice scene with Lily.
I was told that he used to work on this railroad, but he never leaves the other side of the mountain now. You seem puzzled, Mr. Conductor.
Well, I am puzzled. This place looks like the island of Sodor, but how would Burnett Stone travel there without gold dust?
Stacy, did you know my grandma?
My mother did. She said Tasha was a wonderful dancer.
I think Grandpa liked to call Grandma Lady.
Lady?
Yes, I heard him say that name when they were talking.
I wish... Oh, never mind.
Didi Khan was in a couple of films herself, like Raggedy Ann and Andy, a musical adventure, You Light Up My Life, Grease, Grease 2, and Grease Live. Cody McMains as Patch has a role worth talking about too, since he's the one who discovered Burnett Stone's hideout and knows his way around the area.
I better be off to Muffle Mountain. I promised Mr. Stone that I'd clean out his yard today.
Does Burnett Stone ever give you a smile?
No, but he doesn't frighten my horse either. Which means I don't think he's a bad man. I think he's just sad. I've always wanted to go this way. We're following some shadowy lines I've seen on a map. They're like railroad tracks without any rails.
For McMains, his career path has slowed since the release of this film. The same year of this movie, he also was in Escape to Grizzly Mountain and Bring It On. Then was in Madison, not another teen movie, and most recently FDR, American Badass in 2012. Lastly, there's Michael E. Rogers, who plays Mr. C. Jr. Now, although the family ties that consist of Baldwin and this guy is rather weird because he has Jr. in his title but is a cousin, I believe there is a simple explanation. He has Jr. in his name because that's his occupation title. Like he's not a fully fledged senior level conductor who's seasoned enough to know the ins and outs of the rails. It's just his job status. Anyway, C. Jr. is the first time to ever include more than one conductor, but he performs well in his own way, especially with his Scottish accent. He just makes his lines that much more comical. He may not be the most motivated or responsible, but this is probably why he still has his junior status.
Junior, is that you?
Oh, hi, Cuz. Are you in a tunnel? This isn't a very good line.
Junior, where are you?
I'm in paradise. I just got on cloud 9 and here I am.
Junior?
Whoa!
Junior?
Junior?
Junior, what are you doing up there? Come down! It's too windy!
This is just like the fun fair! Give us 2 seconds!
For Rogers, he hasn't been in any real hard hitters, but still acts. He was in movies like The Patriot, which IMDb can't seem to confirm, even though there's plain as day footage of him.
We have the private the Cherokee Scouts brought in.
Private. Colonel William Tavington, Green Dragoons. Who did this?
It was Matt. I couldn't really tell you who it was.
Calm down. Calm down, man. Now, 20 of His Majesty's soldiers are dead.
He was also in Red Rose and Sinner. What's more intriguing is that he also has his own site called michaelrogersstudio.com, where he talks about acting as a profession.
How important is it that the actor is trained? Well, I don't think it's a choice. I think it's your obligation. Actors who are not trained will possibly have some success, but it won't have, it will have a limit.
Quite a change in persona as opposed to what he shows in this movie.
And that covers the human characters. But we're not done yet, because where would this review be without talking about Thomas and his friends? It would be a big mistake if I didn't talk about them.
For Thomas, voiced by Eddie Glenn, his voice was appropriate for the Blue Tank Engine. Sounding youthful and motivated, Glenn, as the first actor to voice Thomas individually, is adequate for the job.
Mr. Conductor, where are you? I know you live far away, but you always seem to get here on time. Oh, Mr. Conductor, are you all right?
Yes, Thomas, but sometimes everything happens at once.
Junior, look.
It's Thomas. Thomas! Now, don't look so surprised. I know you haven't seen me since... You stuffed party poppers down my funnel. Hey, we had a laugh. You did.
Glenn has had multiple other jobs in voice acting like Odin, Pat Labor the movie, Pat Labor 2, and Digimon the movie. Now let's look at Neil Crone and Kevin Frank, two voice actors who have worked alongside each other before. Together, they voice 4 characters each. Neil Crone as Diesel 10 was originally going to have a Russian accent.
And then I ended up landing this great role of the Diesel 10 character.
You know, he talked like that all the time, and he was always talking to Pinchy, his crane on top. And he used to get really upset with Pinchy. Stop that! What do you think you're doing? This is the voice of Diesel 10, who's been sniffing too much of his own diesel fumes.
Kind of sounds a little bit like a Gru character. Could you imagine, like, Diesel 10 having a Gru face or something? Or, even better, could you imagine Gru having that kind of voice? However, Crone was ultimately told to omit this due to possibly insulting somebody. So instead, Crone stuck with what sounds like a Jersey accent. However, even with that minor change, Crone makes his role his own, and it's really enjoyable. So many of his lines have comic delivery, and half of it sounds like improvisation. Especially when he calls the engines puffballs. Let's also not forget his funny cackle and his strange self-aware appendage known as Pinchy.
So, boss, how come you let Twinkle Toes escape?
Yeah. Oh, that, well, I did it on purpose. You know, I was testing him to see if he could escape.
Liar. Pants on fire. Does he wear pants? Well, training pants.
All right. Playtime's over, Splodge. Old McDiesel had a plan. With a pinch here and a pinch there. Here a pinch, there a pinch. I cracked myself up. I got a plan, and you're not in it.
You can't catch me, Diesel.
Losing your sparkle, huh? What perfect timing. I've been working on the railway all the livelong day. Yeah, who wants to work a livelong day anyway? Hello, Twinkle Toes. Remember me? Fat Hat won't have much use for you looking like that.
Then there's the goofy henchman working for Diesel 10, that being Splatter and Dodge, of which each actor voiced one of these silly diesels. It's actually really impressive because both sound so similar to one another. Together, though, they produce some very playful dialogue when they are discussing plans with their boss, who also has quite a nickname for them.
I got a job for you, Splodge.
Actually, it's a Splatter. and Dodge.
I ain't got time to say both names.
Oh, well.
I've come back to find a steam engine.
Oh, that's easy. Yeah, they're everywhere. Yeah, he came in.
Not the one I want.
Routine flyby, chaps. Hello! The boss dumped sneezing powder everywhere. Let's start laughing now.
Oh, sorry, brutes. Bit of a dust-up. Love to stay and clean up. Got to go. Bye now!
Did you mean to look like that? No. Neither did I.
Now it's time for the next lesson, huh? I call it How to Stop Being Stupid. I know that's gonna ruin my facial.
And this is also the scene where I get my favorite line.
I call it How to Stop Being Stupid. I call it How to Stop Being Stupid.
And it doesn't end there, character-wise. Crone also voiced Gordon, the big engine, although it does not sound as pompous or as old as the other voice actors who have portrayed him before.
Collecting Mr. Conductor is an important job, Important is big. James is a big engine, You, Thomas, are small. Small, teeny, weeny. And I'm a big blue engine who knows everything.
Bossy sprockets! All that steam has gone to your funnel.
I'm counting how many seconds late you are. What does that sign say?
Sodor Railway. Really reliable and right on time.
But you weren't on time, little Thomas.
And you're being bossy, Gordon.
Frank, on the other side of things, voiced Harold in the previous clip, Bertie, an old friend of Thomas, and Henry. Just like Harold, Bertie pretty much has a cameo, but one that reminds fans that both he and Thomas still tease each other about their classic race back in the day.
How about a race, Thomas? Sorry, Bertie, I can't today. I have to be a really useful engine and solve some mysteries instead. I guess that means I win. Perhaps another day.
As for Henry, Frank's voice is okay too, as much as it doesn't make any sense how the engine is depicted as still being sick, when that issue was corrected many seasons ago.
Morning, Henry. What's the matter?
I've got boiler ache.
And I'm collecting 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 trucks of special Island of Sodor coal for you.
Oh, thank you, Thomas. Special coal will make me feel much better.
Toby's right. Diesel knows that the lost engine in the legend really exists.
What engine? What legend?
Of an engine whose magic makes her more powerful than Diesel will ever be. That's why he wants to find her.
Then we'd better find her first. Leave it to the big engines, Percy.
Crone has been in movies like Bait, American Psycho 2, All American Girl, The Recruit, Hollywoodland, Hairspray, and most recently, It. Kevin Frank was in far less than Crone, but made it into Getting Away with Murder and Lady in the Water.
And with that, we only have a few more voice actors to cover. If there had been more material to cover on the original voice cast that was for the original film, I would have done that too, though.
Playing Toby, the second wisest Steamy on the island, is voiced by Colm Feore. And I say second wisest because Edward should have been in there too. Feore as Toby was a decent choice. His voice is smooth and mature enough sounding to come across as one who has experience to know certain things.
Diesel is after the lost engine.
And if he finds her, I fear that will destroy us all.
What, even an engine as big as me?
Yes, Gordon, even you.
I think Diesel's around here.
I'm sorry, you two. Diesel heard every word you said. Oh, no. I'm going after him to see what he does next. You'd better carry on and get the mail delivered.
Oh, you're very brave, Toby.
Oh, Diesel won't bother with an old engine like me. He thinks I'm really useless.
I especially like that scene because of how sarcastic that line is read by Feore. That and Thomas's expression of, really? Is that what you think? Feore was in a number of smash hits like Face Off, City of Angels, Titus, The Sum of All Fears, Chicago, Paycheck, The Chronicles of Riddick, Changeling, Thor, Jack Ryan's Shadow Recruit, and The Amazing Spider-Man 2. Linda Ballantyne and Susan Roman as the voice of Percy and James respectively were okay in their roles, although they do tend to get more flack than the rest simply because they were actresses portraying male characters. And I guess for most, it was hard accepting that because it wasn't as convincing as, let's say, Tara Strong voicing Timmy Turner from The Fairly Odd Parents, or Nancy Cartwright playing Bart from The Simpsons. It's not like they completely disregard the gender of James and Percy. Percy is still Thomas's best friend and helps in trying to solve the mystery surrounding Lady.
Oh, but Mr. Conductor, without your sparkle or the lost engine, you can't travel here to help us anymore.
I'll solve the problem. You just go to sleep now.
Easy for you to say. Oh, Thomas, I've been worried about you. Bertie says you lost a coal truck today.
Yes, it disappeared when I was at the buffers, near the little grotto.
Maybe those are the buffers that lead to the secret railway.
And the grotto is the lost engine special platform.
Oh, yes!
And James is still portrayed as a bossy buffer tender engine who thinks he has the higher ground, even though half of the time he's misbehaving.
Hey, Mr. C, why do you look so tired? Is it because I'm red? Diesel says red is a very tiring color, but Mr. C, red looks so nice against the snow. It's not me, is it?
Oh, no, of course not, James. I think that red is bright and cheerful.
Oh, good.
Just like my sparkle.
What are you doing in the sheds, James?
I'm feeling a little blue, which isn't so hot when you're red. I was naughty and Sir Topham Hatt told me to think about all the ways I can be really useful. Then I can come out again.
Ballantyne was best known for being Sailor Moon in the self-titled TV show. Ed Roman was also in the Sailor Moon series and had a couple other voice roles in movies like Heavy Metal and Rock and Rule. Lastly, Britt Allcroft had a very small role as the Mystery Engine Lady. Although she wasn't intended to speak, it was nice to give the special engine a voice. Some may argue there was no point, since Lady practically has no development among the rest, but her introduction should not be neglected.
Lady, you're a really helpful engine.
And helping each other brings to life the magic in all of us.
Just that line alone is a truth in itself, something of which people should remember more often. It is important to help out each other, because it is what brings out the best in everyone.
And that's that. I'm really glad that I was able to cover all the major and minor players to the cast list, because for the most part, they all do a really good job, as bad as they get critiqued about it.
Action and cinematography. I feel like some may think I might have categorized this wrong. Action? Thomas the Tank Engine has action in it? Yeah, it does, believe it or not. It's nothing super high-octane like something as a John Woo or Bruce Lee movie, but it does have certain scenes that provide the needed liveliness that demonstrates, yes, even in the land of talking engines, there can be fun. For those who have been following the episode commentaries, I think most can agree that Season 5 up until this movie had the most intense action sequences, one even getting close to Michael Bay territory. Much of these scenes belong to Diesel 10 in the movie and his hydraulic claw. So much of it is used in destructive scenes, which is why this makes the character of Diesel 10 such a game changer for the brand. As much as people don't like this movie, without it we wouldn't have Diesel 10, plain and simple. But even without Diesel 10, just seeing these engines rolling around on the rails is awesome work. Locomotives in general are cool, and seeing these mechanical Goliaths on the move is just great. These machines aren't that slow. Which now leads us to the other aspect to the movie, the visuals and cinematography. As mentioned before, some find trains with static faces unnerving, but this is what gave these characters their charm in the show. But then again, so was anything else. To see these model engines featured on the big screen and placed into live-action sequences is a feat in itself. To see Thomas and all the others on a 1.37:1 aspect ratio, or widescreen, makes all the difference, and boy is it a big one. Not only is there more to see, but more to appreciate. There's just a whole cinematic look and feel to how the models are presented as to how they looked in the show. Iconic spots like the watermill, Knapford Station, and Tidmouth Sheds are three that really get the best treatment. Just look at how much different they are by comparison. They just look larger and believably life-sized. Fans of the show also get to see more of the Sodor Ironworks. The two model sets to incorporate live action, though, was the Sodor Grain Windmill and the Big Dipper Viaduct, where tension is always raised. Both involve the model trains with real-life actors, and it looks pretty good considering the movie is from 2000 and the budget that it had. In all honesty, I used to believe the Big Dipper Viaduct was the classic viaduct from the show early on, but apparently it's different. Either way, it's a magnificent-looking structure.
And although there's only a few recognizable places that are featured from the show in the movie, the rest of the sets and layouts look fantastic. There's just something about model train sets that just look amazing.
Then there's the actual real locations captured on screen involving life-size props. Places like Shining Time Station, Muffle Mountain, and Burnett Stone's workshop are all beautiful places to see. For cameraman Paul Ryan, who captured these images, the scenery is breathtaking. With filming locations taking place in the United States, Canada, and especially the Isle of Man, there's a lot to admire when it comes to the natural surroundings. There's tons of grassy pastures and mountain ranges as far as the camera lens can pan across. In other words, it speaks volumes as to how much these areas were used to mimic that of the island of Sodor. All these places have optimistic, blue skies and never-ending beauty. Ryan was also the cinematographer to movies like Where the Rivers Flow North and Spin. And even with the CGI effects added in, it still looks great. Which it's important to note that it's not constantly around throughout the movie. There are bits of it, but it's nothing along the lines of full-on green screen motion capture. The heaviest bit is when Thomas is on the Magic Railroad. There, he's in full CGI. And now that I say that, I know exactly where those railway lines lead to. Yes! Why didn't I see it before?
Well, okay, I mean, it's a little far-fetched to say that the rail line would lead to Marvel's Ant-Man, but it would have been funny if it was.
Soundtrack and film score. When it comes to movies, having a film score and a soundtrack can be two different things. The film score provides the instrumental music and emotion to the various scenes of a movie, while a soundtrack can feature various artists singing songs that may be related to or reference material in the movie. Sometimes songs can be created that were inspired by the movie. As for film scores, these will only feature orchestral music, while a soundtrack may have artists only, or a mix between the score and said artists. These two entities can both be fun and enjoyable in their own way. But it's even better when they work together, and that's exactly what happens in this movie. The album released for this movie is a soundtrack that features songs sung by artists in the movie and the film score itself. What works great about this particular combo is that the songs sung by the artists are themes that end up being used as character motifs for the human characters in the score. When a composer can combine these things together into a wholesome collection of music, that takes the right skill and person. The list of singers to the soundtrack may not all be the ones to hit the top 100 billboards, but they certainly deserve a shout-out for their work.
I'm for reals, yo. I don't understand why people find the song so bland. There's so much emotion put into these songs that it just elevates the experience so much more. And I think they did a really good job, as well as the film score.
Of the whole roughly 50-minute listening experience, there is really only one song fans were split on. And that was Locomotion, sung by Atomic Kitten. It's only played at the end credits, but some felt it just didn't fit the tone as did everything else. It's not the worst song ever heard, though. There were probably other complaints on how the Shining Time theme song was not the same tune as the one originally composed by Joe Raposo from the original show. But the film's version is also well done. Some have complained it sounds too generic. Not so. I will compare the difference between the two when the time comes. Summer Sunday is a calm, cool, and laid-back tune for Mr. C. Jr., who always had the mentality to begin with. The song's Some Things Never Leave You is a pretty waltz for Burnett Stone, and I Know How the Moon Must Feel is a great cue for Lily. But of course, the Really Useful Engine song was kept in as well, which is an iconic melody for the Blue Tanker. And even recently, a thought-to-be-lost Shining Time song cover that was played in the movie was released by the composer himself. Hummy Man, the composer behind the score and a number of these songs, was someone who really should be taken up more often on work. I emailed him myself to thank him for what he had done for the film and wondered whether or not there were any other tracks he could effectively release. Thankfully he responded, which was amazing in itself. However, he felt what the soundtrack provided was the essential parts to the film, which I agree.
I respect his opinion completely because he's done such a great job. But at the same time, being that I like having completed film scores, I know there are certain scenes in the movie that have music but are not featured on the album. And that really, I want to complete it so bad.
Either way, though, Hummy Man was a fantastic choice for taking on this movie. Although there were initial reports of John Barry being attached to this, which kills me every time I think about it. For those who are familiar with him, could you see John Barry composing a film score to Thomas the Tank Engine? The composer to practically all the early 007 films? The Black Hole? And Raise the Titanic? Oh god, the score would have been hella crazy good. But that's what could have been, and Man did a great job anyway. Every track featured in this score is amazing. Right from the main title, fans will hear Man's orchestral version of Thomas's anthem theme, originally composed by Mike O'Donnell and Junior Campbell, bounce in fully fledged, and it's astounding. There's tons of woodwinds to help realize this sound since the original song was performed on synthesizers. But this is where listeners will hear songs mentioned in the soundtrack bit come up in these cues as well. Tracks like Burnett and Lady feature the Some Things Never Leave You melody, while Lily and Patch feature I Know How the Moon Must Feel. All of it coincides with each other and really brings out the character's own cues in a very beautiful way. Even silly cues like Diesel 10 and Splodge are highly entertaining with their lumbering brass instruments and kooky-sounding 1-2 notes thrown in at the end. But of course, the most powerful and emotional bits of the score belong to the final chase that was featured in this video up until the very end of the film. It is this section of the movie many people remember well, and that says a lot about how well Hummy Man composed this work. Now, without further ado, here are the clips I've been talking about.
As it all should be, far away from it all.
thought that I could ever give my life to one girl. I feel like I'm finished, washed up and unaccomplished. I dissolve too soon. I'll never forget the first time I saw you. You took my breath away. I'll never forget.
He's a really useful engine, you know. All the other engines, they'll tell you so. He huffs and puffs and whistles, rushing to and fro. He's the really useful engine we adore.
Reach for the story, follow the rainbow sun to a shining time station where dreams can come true, waiting there for you.
And just to clarify, Mann is still composing, which is great to hear. His most notable parts were to films like Woolly Boys and Mel Brooks' Robin Hood Men in Tights.
I don't know what else to say other than without Mann, this movie would not have had the emotional impact that it did. Film scores are like half the experience when it comes to a movie. And this movie is proof of that.
Overall impression. Was it a flub or a job well done? Not like I've needed to answer that. I've truly said a lot already on the matter about this movie. How it has affected me, how it has affected others, and how it is perceived today. It is certainly no Academy Award or Oscar winner movie, because it does have its flaws. But all in all, it is a movie that has shaped many people for good and bad, and will always remain a part of the Thomas community. It truly is a special movie with a story handled well by its actors, various voice talents, visuals, music, and overall story about love and magic. And it's not the worst movie on the planet by a long shot.
But again, I understand for those who do not like it and will argue otherwise. I may be completely wrong. Just don't railroad me for it.
Come in, and join the party, Splodge.
Hooray, hooray!
Oh, wow.
We're gonna have a party!
I love parties!
Yeah, who's got the balloons?
What? Correction! Join the party that's over!
We don't like you. Yeah, we mean that.
Emphatically.
It's a good word.